Well, my concerns are a few. Perception about India internationally was seriously affected when we went in for retrospective amendments after the Supreme Court judgment and the GAR rules.
Absolutely.
That perception continues to be quite negative, because after that several tax notices on transfer pricing were sent to many international corporations without much legal basis. Another major negative perception has been created recently by allowing the rupee to depreciate to an extremely low level of 69 to a dollar. Fortunately, in the last 2 or 3 days, it has appreciated back to around 66 to a dollar. Now, such a rapid depreciation of the rupee was neither called for based on the inflationary differentials or on the productivity norms. I could have understood if it was contained at 57 to 60, but allowing it to depreciate so rapidly without much intervention by the Reserve Bank of India. I think the Reserve Bank of India should have expended some of the reserves. They could have made them up by other means later on, because such a rapid depreciation of the rupee would lead to severe inflation. It would create a severe problem on the fiscal deficit and seriously affects the stock market, which could affect investments coming into India. So I think that was a bit of a mistake. We should have corrected it. Hopefully it is being corrected. And of course, if we do some of these things well, then the excellent agricultural season we have ahead with the very good monsoon can create a revival of sentiment, because I feel agricultural growth will be good. I feel it will lead to advantages in other spheres also because of the demand from rural areas. I feel there is an opportunity to defend the rupee, make sure we get it back to around the 57 to 60 level.
Okay.
And then leverage on the excellent agricultural output that comes about, go with reforms. It's a shame we have not been able to put the goods and services tax, because that would add 2 percentage points to our growth rate. That would have been a great savior in this difficult situation. One other thing I'd like to point out, we keep saying that Indonesia and Brazil or South Africa are facing difficulties, but we fail to realize that there are some countries where the currency hasn't depreciated much. Take 2 large countries among the 10 largest by population in the world, Bangladesh and Nigeria. Their currencies are reasonably strong. So I think we should not make excuses of the global situation. We should treat India on its own merits. There's a lot of things we can do. Fortunately, we can get things back to normal through certain actions, and if done quickly, I think it will be very helpful to see that the second half of the year GDP growth is restored back to a strong level, and then get back to a further GDP growth acceleration over the next fiscal.
Dr. Ahluwalia must answer. You've killed perception, killed investment climate with measures like retrospective taxation, the retrospective clauses even in the land bill, which are spooking everyone in the real estate sector. Anyone who wants to buy land, they're saying if it takes 5 years to buy land, why will any industrialist like Mr. Godrej wait that much time just to procure land? Mr. Godrej has listed some very important concerns. You must answer them, Dr. Ahluwalia.
Yeah, let me say that Mr. Godrej didn't talk about the some retrospectivity in the land issue. What he referred to was taxation related matters. I agree that the retrospective taxation that was done a year ago did lead to a very negative impact. I think we have actually said that these are very exceptional steps, and I can't speak for the government, but personally my view is that we should never do retrospective stuff. Well, that's a different issue. Yes, there was some damage. I believe that people understand that that is not going to be a general policy of the government. You know, as far as the GAR issue, which I think was also mentioned, I think the government has actually reassured people that GAR is not going to be the problem they think. A lot of circulars and clarifications have been issued, and my impression is that some of the fears that were raised in the case of GAR have subsided. I agree that a very good positive development in the current year is what looks like a very good monsoon. That will certainly lead to better agricultural performance. That will lead to not just higher agricultural growth, which will directly affect GDP growth, it will also lead to higher rural incomes. That will stimulate rural demand, also generate some support for non-agricultural growth based on that demand. So that's all very much to the good. I think we must limit, when there is a downturn, you've got to recognize that it takes a bit of time to recover. I think what we're concentrating on, our activities, are really things that do not require legislative action. I agree completely, by the way, that the GST, the Goods and Services Tax, is perhaps the single most important economic reform that we should be doing. And quite frankly, my own assessment is that, the different political parties, they're not actually negative, but we're not able to bring them to a consensus to get it done. Perhaps they don't want to get it done before the general election, which is short-sighted, but whatever it is, I think most people looking at India, and I'm really looking long-term, I'm not looking at this quarter or the next quarter. I think most people reading the Indian political scene have come to the conclusion that the GST will happen, but probably it'll happen next year.
But we are losing crucial time.
This year.
We are losing crucial time.
I can assure you,
the GDP figures are taking a knock as a consequence.
Don't interrupt me. Please remember, the GST requires a constitutional amendment. It is not something that the government can simply decide to do. And we have been working very hard with all the state governments, including the opposition parties, to try and get a consensus. So this is not, if India Inc. feels that GST has been a wasted opportunity, I fear the blame for it lies entirely on the opposition side. The government has wanted the GST to come in.
Okay. Sunil Lala, do you buy that argument that it's the opposition to blame, not the government?
Dr. Ahluwalia, I must add one quick thing.
Absolutely.
One quick thing I must add. What Adi has said is that, look, the perception is wrong. Okay, the perception is not right. What do you do to change the perception? You go in for two expenditure things to be passed in the bill, in Parliament. You get a whip declared, all the political parties are called in, rather than revenue generation movement. So when the perception is down, you want to pass a couple of bills which are more revenue generating, and then get the mood up and then pass the land. Nobody's saying don't feed the poor. Nobody's saying don't look after the farmers.
No, I see your point.
No, Doctor.
That's not the issue.
No, it is the issue, because how will you
Let me respond to that. The food security bill has been on the agenda since 2009.
Right.
This is the last 10 months of this government. After much discussion, parliamentary discussion, standing committee, one thing should be quite clear. That is a bill that all the political parties seem to want. India Inc. doesn't want it, but the political consensus, whatever the reason. So what does India Inc. legitimately should say? And I think perhaps they've said it. They should feel reassured that you're not going to bust the fiscal deficit ceiling because you've got this bill.
No, but Dr. Ahluwalia,
the finance minister has categorically said.
I'm asking you just one thing. Do you feel that after 66 years, 70% of India's population needs to be given this kind of a benefit? I think there could be 20 or 25%, nobody would have objected. 70% means it's very political, it's really going in for votes. Are you saying 70% of India's population needs this kind of food? Second, the question that I want to ask, all right, I'll just finish my point. I'll just finish my point. And everybody that I speak to says there's only 20,000 crores more or whatever compared to what we were planning. This is a move without an expiry date. Who will pay for this will be the middle income group, whose taxes you will have to raise with whichever government comes in next year, because I do not see the fiscal deficit going down without the 200 or 300 million middle income group, which has been supporting the economy and the consumption story, being hammered further.
Okay.
Because it's so easy to say, let's spend this first then we'll discover who gives us the money. So I don't see the government laying out a plan. This is what it will cost me in 2014. This is what it will cost me in 2015. This is where the revenue is going to
Dr.
come
Ahluwalia
from.
answer.
And therefore everybody can then relax. You've got a plan. You've just got an expenditure plan. How are you going to fund it? And one last thing, one last thing, very quickly, you said the finance minister has put in the red line, I will not allow fiscal deficit to go beyond that. The government has been saying, I won't let GDP growth drop every time. Where is the confidence in what is being said by the government? Please understand, today you have to revive the confidence. I'm not turning around and saying, everybody's saying, fine, he said it. He'll come in March and say, sorry, it didn't happen again, and then we go on.
Okay,
So
let
where is
Dr.
the
Ahluwalia
confidence
answer.
level?
All very good points, and you know, when there is a bit of distress in the system, and there is distress, people can very often articulate these things. But to my mind, there is a huge difference between the government saying this is going to be the growth rate and the government saying this is going to be the fiscal deficit. Well, let's face it, the growth rate is not something that the government legislates or takes action on. It can say we're doing a lot of things, we hope the growth rate will come up. On the fiscal deficit, it's much more a matter under the finance minister's control. If more expenditure is occurring in certain areas, I mean, he could cut other expenditure. So if you're really only concerned about the deficit and you're not taking the view that the food security bill itself is wrong, but some of you seem to be.
Timing.
I don't want to join that issue because that's been a long debate, and let me put it this way. When we, in the Planning Commission, for example, we said, look, let's de-link the food security entitlement from the poverty line. When we mention poverty line figures, the TV, the newspapers, they whip up a sentiment that, you know, poverty is too low. Then when you decide to have a food security bill that covers 67% of the population, everybody gets back and says, no, why are you covering so many people? Now, quite frankly, you can play this game whichever way you like. I'm just saying to you that the actual increase in expenditure on the food security bill will not destabilize the budget. I think there are many other things we need to do in order to protect the budget, and we should do them. But it's not the case that because of this bill, the budget will be destabilized.
Mr. Godrej, Dr. Ahluwalia argues that the government has done enough to ensure and to reach out to capitalists like you, to investors, and to reassure them that retrospective taxation was a one-off mistake and will not be repeated. Do you think that the government has succeeded in reassuring investors? Because that doesn't seem to be the case. FDI in multi-brand retail was allowed. Not too many foreign companies seem keen on investing because they simply don't believe that the government will live up to the promise. Do you agree with Dr. Ahluwalia when he says the government is doing enough to reassure investors, Mr. Godrej?